Welcome back to the deep dive. We take the source material you share with us, headlines, the reports, the research, and we really drill down until we understand the global context, the legal philosophy, and the profound, often hidden implications.
And today we are looking at a story that just perfectly illustrates this massive sort of chaotic chasm that exists between global drug policy, cultural change, and, judicial sovereignty.
It really does.
Our source material is a recent and, I have to say, pretty surprising court decision. It's detailed in a BBC report from just hours ago, the sentencing of the globally famous American rapper Wiz Khalifa.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because here is the core contradiction we're starting with, and it's why this deep dive is so essential.
Yeah.
You have Thomas Cameron Jabril, who we all know as Wiz Khalifa, an artist whose entire brand identity is, it's pretty much synonymous with cannabis advocacy and consumption.
Absolutely. It's central to who he is as a public figure.
And he performs an act, smoking a joint on stage that is, rapidly becoming legal or decriminalized in huge parts of his home country, the United States.
Yeah.
And for this, he gets a 9-month prison sentence in Romania.
A custodial sentence. Not a fine, not a warning. Actual prison time.
The mission today is to move far beyond just the celebrity gossip aspect of this.
Exactly. We're here to dissect the profound legal and cultural disconnect that's just been laid bare by this one event. The judicial process is often, it's a window into a nation's soul.
100%.
And we need to understand why. Why did the Constania Court of Appeal in Romania escalate this from a simple fine to a 9-month prison offense? And critically, we have to analyze what the real-world enforcement implications are now that this sentence has been passed in absentia.
Right.
For you, the listener, this is really a masterclass in how global fame collides head-on with local sovereignty.
Exactly. We are diving into the judge's specific rationale, which focuses not on the drug, but on the message. The geopolitics of extradition between NATO allies and the broader shifting landscape of global cannabis legality that allowed this whole situation to happen.
So let's start at the beginning.
Let's do it. Ground ourselves firmly in the facts of the inciting incident itself.
Okay. So the event that led to all of this dramatic legal conclusion, it all centers around Thomas Cameron Jabril.
And we're not talking about some private offense here. This was a high-profile, highly visible action. It was performed on a major international stage, and it feels like it was designed for maximum visibility.
That visibility is the key. It's everything.
Yeah.
The incident took place during his performance at the Beach Please Festival. This was in Costanesti, Romania, on July 13th, 2024.
Go.
And during his set, the rapper openly, and I'd say intentionally, smoked a joint on stage. The source material notes he basically admitted to it, made no attempt whatsoever to hide it.
Right, so this public, almost brazen nature of it is precisely the factor that eventually turned what could have been a regulatory issue into a really serious criminal conviction.
That's the pivot point. And what's fascinating is the initial reaction from the local Romanian authorities, which, it seems relatively measured and predictable at the time.
What happened right after he got off stage?
So the sources say that police briefly held and questioned Jabril immediately after the concert ended.
Which sounds like standard procedure, right, for like a public order violation or maybe a minor possession charge?
It was standard operating procedure for that moment, yes. The initial holding and questioning were swift, and we actually know from Jabril's own comments afterwards that he felt the authorities were very respectful.
Okay, so he didn't think it was a big deal.
Not at all. But following that, local prosecutors moved quickly to charge him formally, and the charge was possession of risk drugs for personal use. So the wheels of the judicial process had started turning, even if the artist himself just saw it at a minor inconvenience.
And this brings us to the quantities, which is often the yardstick, that these crimes are measured by globally. What did the Romanian investigators claim he actually had on him?
They claimed he was in possession of more than 18 grams of cannabis.
18 grams.
And of course, they included the crucial detail that he also consumed an additional amount while he was performing on stage.
So 18 grams. That sits in a kind of complicated legal space, doesn't it?
It really does. By, say, U.S. state-level standards in a place like California, 18 grams is a total non-issue. It's personal use, easily and legally purchased.
Right.
However, in many stricter European jurisdictions, 18 grams is definitely above a casual, joint in the pocket quantity.
It's not trafficking, but it's not nothing.
Exactly. While it's not typically seen as a large-scale trafficking offense, it moves the charge beyond the absolute most minimal possession category. And that gives prosecutors and courts significant discretion.
And the legal response here in Romania,
Mhm.
it unfolded in two very distinct and, shockingly divergent chapters. Tell us about that first ruling.
Okay, so initially, a lower court approached this case exactly as you might expect for a non-violent personal use drug offense committed by a wealthy person.
So a fine.
A straight financial penalty. They imposed a fine of 3,600 Romanian lei.
And what does that translate to?
Well, the BBC did the conversion for a global audience. The fine equated to approximately 619 times, or about 829 USD.
$829.
Yeah.
For an artist of his stature and income, that's negligible. It's less than a speeding ticket in some places.
It is. It's a fine that just screams, we acknowledge the technical violation, but we aren't viewing this as a serious threat to society.
It sounds entirely proportionate to what you might expect in, like, a U.S. misdemeanor court.
It does. And that initial ruling probably set the expectation for his defense team and for the artist himself. They likely thought, okay, paid the fine, it's over.
But then came the pivot.
And this is the core tension point of our whole deep dive today. The Constania Court of Appeal, a higher judicial body, intervened and completely overturned that financial penalty.
They didn't just increase it, they overturned it.
Completely. They viewed the fine not just as insufficient, but as fundamentally inappropriate for the nature of the crime he committed.
And the final ruling was the shocker. 9 months in prison to be served in custody.
9 months.
That is a truly monumental escalation. You go from being fined less than $1,000 to receiving a sentence that is, traditionally reserved for serious, often violent crimes or maybe repeat drug offenders.
The contrast is just staggering. The difference between an $829 fine and 9 months in a custodial facility it's not just a difference in degree, it's a difference in judicial philosophy.
It has to be. Which raises the big question. How do you account for a change in legal assessment that's so profound it turns a misdemeanor into an incarcerable offense?
Right.
The amount of the drug didn't change? The law didn't change between rulings? What shifted?
What shifted was the court's focus. My initial thought is that the severity of the crime suddenly became proportional to the size of the audience. The appeals court essentially ruled that Jibril's fame was the most aggravating factor of all. Is that the essence of their legal shift?
That is absolutely the essence of it. The appeals court wasn't just penalizing the physical possession of 18 grams. They were penalizing the platform,
The influence.
the global influence, and the message that performance sent to a domestic population, particularly Romania's youth.
So they shifted the legal focus from the actus reus, the criminal act of possession, to the social harm, or even the incitement caused by the public nature of the performance.
It's a completely different way of looking at the crime.
Which means we have to dive into the specific language the judges used to justify this monumental escalation. This is where it gets really, really interesting.
Okay, let's do it.
So when the Constantia Court of Appeal delivered its written decision to overturn that initial fine, they were, in essence, laying out a philosophical manifesto. You mentioned the fine was deemed insufficient, and that's a massive understatement. The judges deemed it completely inappropriate.
But insufficient for what purpose? If the goal of the law is just to penalize possession, the fine met that criteria. So what was the core non-drug offense that the appeals court was really focused on?
The core offense, according to their highly specific rationale, was centered entirely on normalization and encouragement.
Normalization.
The court ruled that the artist had deliberately sent a message of normalization of illegal conduct, and this normalization, they argued, actively encouraged drug use among young people.
That distinction is so key.
Right.
They weren't just convicting him for the drug he had. They were convicting him for the cultural and social damage they believed was caused by the visible use of his platform.
Exactly.
It suggests that, in their view, the crime committed by Jibril was one of, public incitement or moral corruption, using his celebrity status as the weapon.
Precisely. They are asserting that the sheer force of his international fame transformed a simple act of personal consumption into a public health and legal hazard. In many Western legal systems, we focus heavily on measurable harm.
Right. What actually happened?
The Romanian court, in this instance, focused on the potential, unquantifiable harm of a cultural shift. They are, in effect, prosecuting influence itself.
So this moves us into how they legally define the performance itself. The judges explicitly called it an ostentatious act. Help us unpack that legal term. What does ostentatious imply in a judicial context?
Calling it ostentatious is the judicial weapon they use to justify the severity. Ostentatious means conspicuous, designed to attract attention, often done pretentiously or deliberately to show off.
So it implies intent.
Exactly. By labeling it this way, the court legally solidified the idea that the crime was not a mistake, but a calculated, deliberate piece of public messaging, a performance art piece designed to normalize the illegal activity. And that categorization allows them to apply maximum punitive severity.
And to strengthen this dramatic interpretation of the ostentatious act, the judges listed specific contextual factors that they said amplified the severity. They didn't just leave this up to interpretation. What were the critical factors they cited?
They essentially built a 4-point case against the influence of the act, layer by layer.
Okay.
1, the performer was explicitly identified as a music performer, which underscores his role as a public influential figure.
Right.
2, the action occurred on the stage of a music festival, meaning a highly visible, organized public platform.
Okay, makes sense.
3, they specifically noted the festival was well known among young people, which targets the perceived vulnerability of the audience. And 4, the final summary detail, and this is a direct quote, he possessed and consumed in front of a large audience predominantly made up of very young people an artisanal cigarette.
Wow. If you dissect those 4 points, the court is basically saying, we acknowledge he has influence, and because he used his platform, the stage, the festival, to transmit this illegal act to the most susceptible segment of society, the youth. The fine is irrelevant. The sentence must be proportional to the message transmitted.
It's an exercise in judicial moral authority, a profound assertion of state sovereignty over cultural imports.
So the court is essentially using the maximum penalty available to signal to its own population and to international figures that Romania reserves the right to protect its cultural and moral integrity against what it sees as, corrosive foreign normalization.
That's it exactly. And now let's talk about the sharp contrast this ruling provides with the artist's own immediate reaction. His comments right after the police questioning were so casual, almost celebratory.
Oh, right. He seemed to think it was all over.
He was completely dismissive of the local legal gravity, which just shows how far removed he was from the philosophical seriousness of the Romanian legal system. A day after the incident, he posted on X, confirming he didn't mean to offend the country, and he sounded relieved because the authorities were very respectful and let me go.
And this leads to that famous, now widely quoted post-incident quote.
I'll be back soon, but without a big-ass joint next time.
Yeah. That statement, which he probably made in good faith after what he thought was a minor resolved issue, is now a legal boomerang.
It is. It reflects a Western celebrity's expectation that their fame grants them immunity, or, at worst, a small fine. The 9-month custodial sentence delivered by the appeals court is a direct, sharp, and delayed refutation of that casual promise.
The court's message, delivered months later, is basically, you may think this is a game, but our legal system is serious.
And what's so fascinating here is that the court seems to have taken the full measure of the man and his brand, his whole commercial identity, and used that as the primary evidence against him. They didn't just focus on the drug weight, which is the standard approach in most U.S. courts.
Right, which gets at the difference between legal philosophies.
Yes. While U.S. common law systems often focus on specific, measurable components of the crime, the weight, the location, the intent to distribute, many continental legal systems, especially those in Eastern Europe emerging from, post-Soviet legal traditions, place a much higher emphasis on public order, social impact, and morality in sentencing.
So they're less focused on the letter of the law regarding drug weight.
And more focused on the social consequence of the act. By doing this, the court ensures the penalty isn't just a cost of doing business.
That's a great point. If they had upheld the $829 fine, Jabril would have paid it without a second thought. And the message would have been, celebrities can buy their way out of local laws.
Exactly. But by imposing a custodial sentence, they establish a legal maximum that is non-negotiable and has immense symbolic deterrent value for their own population. The severity of the penalty is the message.
It's a statement that says, your fame and wealth do not grant you impunity here. If you use your platform to violate our laws and corrupt our youth, our judicial system will respond with the gravest possible warning.
The sheer magnitude of the sentence ensures that the incident remains a legal precedent and a domestic talking point for years.
But this dramatic moral statement forces us immediately to confront the reality of international enforcement.
Right.
If this is a statement, is it an enforceable one? How does Romania, a NATO ally, intend to enforce this against a U.S. citizen who is thousands of miles away?
And that's the next big piece of the puzzle. Let's transition now from the philosophy of the sentence to the mechanics of its enforcement.
So we have a legally firm 9-month prison sentence in Romania and a globally recognized figure, Tamaz Cameron Jabril, living his life and performing in California.
The first and most important legal fact here is that Jabril was sentenced in absentia. He wasn't physically present for the ruling. The sources confirm he has been actively performing with other artists like Gunna in California and posting on social media from his home. He is firmly operating under the protection of U.S. jurisdiction.
So what's the practical likelihood of Romania successfully bringing him back to serve those 9 months? I mean, I suspect the political will required on the U.S. side would be enormous for a nonviolent personal use drug offense.
That suspicion is basically confirmed by expert analysis. The BBC article sourced a Romanian criminologist, Vlad Zaha, who, while describing the sentence as unusually harsh, was extremely candid about the probability of him actually serving time.
And what was his assessment?
Zaha's assessment.
Yeah.
There is little to no chance of the U.S. extraditing Jabril.
Little to no chance. That's a pretty powerful judicial assessment.
Yeah.
But let me challenge this a bit. Romania and the U.S. are strategic NATO allies. They're bound by treaties. Shouldn't there be strong diplomatic and legal pressure to honor a foreign judicial ruling, even if it seems harsh from a U.S. perspective?
That's a very important point, and it really highlights the tension between diplomatic alliance and judicial independence. While treaties exist, extradition is never automatic.
Right.
The U.S. has multiple legal and political mechanisms to slow or ultimately deny the request. And Zaha pointed to 3 highly interconnected reasons for this low likelihood. The first is purely practical. The defendant's resources. High-profile, wealthy individuals like Jabril can afford extensive international legal teams dedicated solely to fighting extradition requests.
Yep.
They can draw the process out for years, turning it into a legal marathon that many smaller nations just can't sustain.
So, in essence, wealth provides a form of legal insulation. It allows the defendant to exploit the structural complexities of international law. What about the geopolitical factors Zaha mentioned?
That's the second reason. Romania's lack of real negotiating power on extradition matters with the United States.
The power dynamic.
Exactly. While they are allies, the power dynamic in an extradition negotiation is heavily skewed. The U.S. system is vast, complex, and politically sensitive. Extraditing a famous American citizen for an offense that many U.S. states treat as legal requires significant political will at the State Department level and judicial agreement in the courts.
And the U.S. is unlikely to expend that capital for a 9-month nonviolent drug case.
It's just not a geopolitical priority that outweighs the domestic political fallout of extraditing a celebrity.
And the third factor is maybe the most fascinating, and it takes us right back to the legal contradiction we started with. The complicated legal status of cannabis in the U.S. This relates directly to the principle of dual criminality, right?
Absolutely. Extradition treaties universally require the principle of dual criminality. This means the act for which a person is being extradited must constitute a serious crime in both the requesting jurisdiction, Romania, and the asylum jurisdiction, the U.S.
And this is the crucial legal choke point for Romania.
It is. Now, help us break down this dual criminality issue specifically in this case, because cannabis is still illegal under U.S. federal law, which is what dictates international treaty obligations. So doesn't that technically satisfy the dual criminality requirement?
Technically, yes. On paper, federal law states cannabis is a controlled substance. However, the legal reality on the ground is far, far messier.
So what's the argument his lawyers would make?
Jabril's legal team would argue before a U.S. court that while the substance is federally illegal, the severity and the nature of the crime, personal use, not trafficking, do not warrant extradition, especially when you balance it against U.S. state laws where the activity is legal.
Right.
The tension created by dozens of U.S. states legalizing cannabis complicates the very notion of crime in a way that U.S. courts have increasing judicial discretion to consider. A judge might ask, does this 9-month sentence align with the prevailing moral and legal standards of the U.S. today?
So the defense would essentially argue that while the crime technically exists on paper federally, the U.S. has already, culturally and politically abandoned the punitive treatment of personal use cannabis, which weakens the legal basis for cooperation.
That's the argument. And furthermore, the U.S. federal system is highly decentralized. Even if the State Department were inclined to pursue the extradition, which is highly unlikely, a U.S. federal judge has to review the warrant and the underlying charges.
And that judge has a lot of power.
A lot. Given the complexity and the relative low severity compared to, say, murder, or major trafficking, a U.S. judge would have strong legal grounds to deny the request or at least prolong the process indefinitely, referencing this shifting national policy landscape.
But Zaha did confirm that even though the probability is low, Romania still has to follow the diplomatic process.
Correct. Zaha noted that a formal judicial request will be submitted to the United States. This is mandatory. Romania has to formally request enforcement of its sentence.
But this request is likely to be viewed by the U.S. as, what, a political headache, rather than a genuine pursuit of justice.
I think that's fair to say. The sentence is a powerful domestic declaration for Romania. The likely outcome, no extradition, will be the global reality that underlines the limits of their judicial reach.
It really seems like the Romanian court issued a maximum sentence with the full knowledge that they might never enforce it.
Making the judicial statement the entire point of the exercise.
Exactly. This tension between law as a moral statement and law as an enforceable reality, it defines this entire conflict.
It does. Let's zoom out now and look at the cultural context that made Jabril commit this act in the first place.
Okay, because the clash we're witnessing is fundamentally a confrontation between a hyper-globalized, permissive American celebrity brand and a conservative, sovereign legal framework that is deliberately resistant to cultural liberalization.
Especially in the post-Soviet context of Eastern Europe.
Yes. And Jabril's public identity and his brand are absolutely central to this collision. He's known globally for massive mainstream hits, but just as importantly, his artistic persona, his entire commercial operation is inextricably linked to cannabis.
This isn't just incidental use, it's commercial integration.
It is. He's frequently pictured smoking on social media platforms, making his consumption part of his public identity. And crucially, he founded his own marijuana brand in 2016, Khalifa Kush.
So he commercialized it.
He did. This cemented cannabis use not just as a personal habit, but as a core element of his global business model and his narrative. When he smoked that joint on the Casanesti stage, he wasn't just breaking the law, he was promoting a commercially available product that is illegal in Romania.
His entire brand narrative is built on the American assumption that cannabis use is, if not legal everywhere, at least culturally accepted and moving rapidly toward full legalization.
And the conflict stems directly from the fractured legal landscape right here in the United States. That's the perfect explanation for the cultural dissonance.
Right. Jabril's commercial freedom, the ability to run Khalifa Kush and promote use openly, is enabled by U.S. policies where cannabis is legal for recreational and medical use in numerous states. He operates under the cultural protection of state law.
But again, the major caveat, which complicates his legal status even at home, is that cannabis remains strictly illegal under U.S. federal law.
And this federal-state contradiction is the ghost in the machine.
It is. It allows U.S. policy to shift culturally and economically while maintaining this veneer of legal prohibition required for international treaties. So when Jabril travels, he brings a brand built on state-level normalization into international environments that are either highly conservative, like Romania, or that strictly abide by the letter of U.S. federal prohibition.
The sources provided even gave us two really powerful headline examples showing the incredible cultural gulf between the U.S. and the legal thinking behind the Romanian court. The first one noted that daily cannabis use now overtakes drinking in U.S. first.
That statistic is a seismic marker of cultural change. I mean, it illustrates that within the U.S., cannabis has transitioned from being a marginalized counterculture activity to a deeply embedded primary consumption habit. It's exceeding alcohol in daily frequency.
For the U.S. audience, that statistic confirms that punishing the normalization of cannabis feels acutely retrogressive. The normalization has already happened. It's a measured fact.
It's done. And the second headline suggests this cultural shift has already been absorbed into the highest levels of politics. Trump expands access to cannabis in a major shift in drug policy.
Right. So this political movement further solidifies the national trend toward broad decriminalization or legalization. Whether it's driven by economics, medical need, or shifting public opinion, the U.S. political system is actively moving toward greater access and acceptance.
While the Romanian ruling, which escalated a fine to a prison term specifically to halt normalization, is moving in the exact opposite direction.
It's a political and judicial counter-reaction to the very cultural forces that Wiz Khalifa himself symbolizes.
Which raises an important question then. When an artist whose entire brand is built around an activity that's legal in their state of residence travels internationally, believing they're operating under the umbrella of U.S. cultural hegemony, How should they realistically navigate laws that treat that activity as a serious crime punishable by prison?
Well, this deep dive shows that the assumption of celebrity immunity is a myth when you're faced with determined local sovereignty.
It is. Jabril was relying on cultural momentum, but the Romanian court explicitly rejected that premise. They weaponized his fame. They transformed him from a musician into a negative social example.
The essential legal lesson here for any globally traveling performer or business person is sobering. When you travel, you are subject to the strictest local laws, regardless of your personal brand, your business interests, or the laws of your home state.
And furthermore, this sentence is a diplomatic signal. It communicates to the U.S. and to all global cultural exporters that local laws and moral standards supersede the expectations of American celebrity culture.
It's a line in the sand regarding cultural influence.
It forces the question of responsibility. While Jabril's team was likely concerned with protecting him from the initial fine, they may have overlooked the profound symbolic risk of committing an act deemed ostentatious in a jurisdiction that was determined to assert its moral authority.
They just failed to fully grasp the judicial philosophy they were up against.
Completely. This was never about the quantity of cannabis. It was about the quantity of attention.
It's a powerful illustration of the limits of globalization when it meets the immovable force of national legal conservatism. The court made a calculated move, leveraging the artist's global reach to maximize the impact of their domestic moral statement.
So this deep dive into the Wiz Khalifa sentencing has been a fascinating exploration of how a single concert incident can expose these deep structural fissures in global policy and legal philosophy.
It really has. Let's quickly summarize the key tensions we've uncovered for you.
Okay. First, we saw the dramatic, almost unbelievable escalation of the penalty by the appeals court, from a simple, forgivable $829 USD fine to a 9-month custodial sentence.
And this escalation was rooted not in the severity of the drug crime itself, but in the court's reasoning that the artist committed an ostentatious act that sent a message of normalization, encouraging youth drug use.
They were sentencing the message, not the gram weight.
Then we analyze the geopolitical reality that immediately renders that sentence functionally inert on the international stage.
Right. Despite the formal judicial request that Romania has to submit, we learned that factors like the defendant's wealth, Romania's lack of negotiating power against the U.S., and the critical complexity of the dual criminality principle, given the fractured U.S. state-federal cannabis laws, all point toward the U.S. denying extradition.
The entire incident serves as a powerful microcosm. A globalized, culturally liberal brand colliding with rigid local laws and a judicial system determined to assert its moral sovereignty. The celebrity's expectations of impunity were explicitly rejected, transforming him into a political symbol.
Which brings us to the final question.
If the sentence is unlikely to be served, and the global reality dictates that the U.S. will not extradite Thomas Cameron Jibril for this offense, what is the true, lasting purpose of this 9-month jail term?
And that is the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. This 9-month sentence is unlikely to lead to actual incarceration, but it achieves maximum domestic impact. Is it a genuine pursuit of justice against an offender?
Or is it purely a calculated legal statement? A cultural and moral warning shot aimed at foreign influence and local youth consumption. A powerful piece of judicial theater designed to assert national values, knowing full well it relies entirely on spectacle rather than enforcement.
Think about the political power of a symbolic sentence, even one that may never be served, and what that spectacle achieves for the nation that handed it down in the global information age.
A truly compelling concept to mull over as you process the information. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.